very quick introduction. My name is Derek Bruce. I have the privilege of working with two companies. One of them is my company, Derek Bruce Associates, and we do awesome stuff with small companies around leadership and talent. I also have another day job for a company you may have heard of. We sell beans called Tesco, and I'm the leadership and culture team. And a lot of the stuff we're doing now very much focuses on HR and L&D tech. And I'm privileged to have Phil talking about this topic for the next probably 60 minutes or so. Before we get into it, I want you to help me welcome Phil to the stage, okay? So Phil is from up north, past Watford, she told me. She loves dogs, and she's actually now been branded the new and improved Dr. Phil. They're the things about her. But before she gets into the session, and what she's going to do, she's going to talk to you for about 25, 30 minutes. Then we're going to have a fireside chat. And during that chat, we're going to give you the chance to ask us anything at all. Okay, so as the presentation's going through, think about questions, think about insights, think about anything at all. Yeah, all good? Yeah, all good? Okay, cool. Those people standing, there are seats here. There are a couple of people from London who have put stuff on the seats, but you're welcome to come down. Typical. You're welcome to come down and just actually grab a seat as well. So, we're going to give Phil something I've done in Copenhagen. We're going to give Phil something called a rock star welcome. Okay? So Phil is she's invested time, energy, blood. She's got a bit of a cold as well. So this is going to be awesome. But to make sure she feels really like this is good, you're all going to give her what would be the same welcome you would give your favorite pop star. So give us a couple of pop star names. I've still got Britney Spears in my head for some reason, but that's not the right one. But somebody, maybe Taylor Swift is probably more contemporary. So imagine Taylor Swift is coming to the stage, you've been waiting for her to come on stage, you're really excited, and what do you normally do? Stand up. You stand up first of all, so you're all going to stand up. You're all going to stand up. You're all going to stand up. Okay, this is going to be hard, Phil, just to give you a heads up. Okay. I'm going to give you a very quick countdown. It's going to be 3, 2, 1. After 1, you're going to imagine Phil is Taylor Swift or replaced by your favorite pop star, okay? And you're going to make, and I'm going to swear I apologize, you're going to make a shitload of noise, okay? You want the whole of the Excel thinking, what's going on in that room? I'm going to go and have a look, okay? So what are you going to do after, how much noise are you going to make? You're going to make, yes, I've got whole people swearing, awesome. Okay, right, so 3, 2, 1, you're going to make noise. Okay, right. You ready, Phil? You ready to come up to the stage? Okay, right. So, you all limber? Yeah, arms are okay? Cool. Right. So, 3, 2, 1.
Thank you. Can you imagine? Oh, I'm far too British for this. I'm also not Taylor Swift, so if you're in any way confused, feel free to leave now. Thank you, Derek. That was wonderful. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. If you don't know who I am, I'm Phil. I'm a researcher. I do a lot of research in public, by which I mean I'm an academic, but I prefer to share my research with real people on the ground, as well as with academics. And really that's what I'm going to be doing today. If you've read any of my stuff, you'll know that I'm interested in AI and the impact that it is having on us. And when I say us, I tend to mean instructional designers, and also on L&D more generally. So when I do my research, I spend a lot of time talking to two flavors of people. One, L&D leaders, usually in large corporates, but also sometimes in small to medium enterprises. And then the others are instructional designers on the ground. And so what I'm going to share with you today and then explore with you, because I'm really interested to hear what your experience is as well. We've got quite a chunk of time for questions, as Derek mentioned, so I'm looking forward to that. But so basically just consider this a bit of a provocation maybe. But I'm essentially just going to share with you what I have learned about where we are right now, when it comes to AI. So what are other people doing out there, and what impact is it having on us as the L&D profession in general, but also as learning designers or instructional designers specifically. And so one thing that I've noticed in the last quarter is that there are certain, apologies for the typo at the top, that is, I'm going to pretend that's deliberate just to keep your attention, trends underway suggest that within 1 to 3 years, your next L&D colleague won't be a human, but will actually be an AI. And this might sound a bit fantastical, but actually there are many, many pieces of research pointing to this. And so the thing I like to ask is, how does this make you feel? I don't know if we have anybody brave enough to share the emotion that comes from this, but I like to ask. Scared? Dog groomer. You're just retraining, absolutely. So scared, yeah, needing to retrain. Anybody with a different emotional reaction to this other than fear? Uncomfortable. Interesting, yeah. Excited. Yeah, hi.
As an employer of instructional designers, I'm feeling very disconnected from them now. As a team, so that collaboration space and connection and relationship is diminishing, which is very
Interesting. Okay, so you're already feeling some of the negative effects, potentially, of working with AI. Yeah, very interesting. So yeah, I mean, this is the reaction that I tend to get. It's a question that I often open with, and I think partly, like, it depends. And this is just the framing that I want to give for the conversation that we're going to have today. And when I say it depends, what we're seeing is across the industry, and this is particularly over the last 6 months, we're seeing the emergence of two AI strategies. This is an oversimplification, but it's true. Just think holistically, zoomed out. In L&D, we're seeing the emergence of 2 different flavors of strategy. One is AI for automation. And so what this does is it puts emphasis on using AI to do the things that probably we're doing already. So the automation of tasks which are currently done by humans, usually with the goal of increasing speed and decreasing cost. And I think this is where a lot of the fear comes from. But there is also a rarer but growing flavor of strategy emerging as well, which is AI for augmentation. So in these organizations, and as I say, they are only, there's a small minority, but they are growing all the time, and there's a lot we can learn from them. But what we're finding there is more of this feeling of excitement, because what's happening there is that we are using AI not just to automate processes which are human, but to make it easier for humans to do their job better. So instead of going shallow and aiming for reductions in costs and headcount, we're going deep and adding real strategic value, and actually, I think, elevating the role of both L&D and instructional designers. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. What I'm going to do is just to show you a few examples of what each of those strategies looks like and what it might mean for us, and to hopefully get your opinion on where you think we can land, or how realistic you think it might be to pursue this strategy of augmentation. First of all, I just wanted to have a quick conversation about problem definition. So one of the questions that I ask, I do quite a bit of work with, like I say, like the leadership teams of L&D in Fortune 500 companies. And when I start those conversations, often there is an assumption that definitely we do need AI, we need new technologies, we need to be disrupted. And so I like to dig into that a little bit and just ask, well, why do we need AI? What opportunities does it offer us to solve problems? What sorts of problems might it solve, and what new opportunities might it present? And actually what I find time and again is, I think, a fundamental misunderstanding here. And in fact, let me just ask the group, there's no wrong answers, because it's fine, it's a safe space. But what specific problems do you think that AI can help us with as L&D teams? Personalization. Resources. Yeah, so saving us time, increasing our velocity perhaps. Yeah, so again, making learning more, like changing the learning experience, let's say, to be less one size fits all, static, stop and learn kind of thing, absolutely. What's interesting is, and those answers are fantastic, and I think a little bit different from what I usually get, but part of this broad answer. But what I find with the leadership team is that speed and cost are seen as the primary problems that we need AI's help to solve. And I think this is true. It's still quite shocking to me that an industry that spends, I think it's now close to $350 billion per year on workplace training of lots of different kinds. Forget the mode, just overall training humans in the workplace. 300 billion. Oh, there we go. I seem to be being live transcribed, but that's fine. And yet, despite year-on-year increases overall, there has been the odd dip in budgets. But despite increases over time and what is an exponential budget, it still takes us 3 to 6 months on average to go from a training request / idea to an actual ready-to-go thing. So it's really slow. And one of the problems I hear about most in the industry is we need to increase time to market. We need to be more agile. There's a feeling at the moment that we put in all of this time and effort and energy, and by the time the training comes out, it's already out of date. And then there's also a massive problem, absolutely, with cost. This figure is always quite shocking to me, but on average, it costs anything from £3,000 to £50,000 to create just 1 hour of training. Again, this is across all different modes. So that might be bringing in subject matter experts. It might be bringing in like expert instructors. It might be making content, whatever. But there's huge variability, and it's always expensive. So I think, without a doubt, L&D is too slow and too expensive. But I think this is where I think we need to open our minds a little bit more, and also maybe just be a little bit more vulnerable, because I do think that there is a more foundational problem than even this. And I think before we start to try to solve the speed and the cost issue of L&D with AI, we need to address this bigger problem, which is quality and impact. And I think it can be very hard for us to accept this, and I think it's probably much more complicated than the stats suggest. But I think for 2 reasons. One, because the training that we tend to design and develop and deliver is not optimal. It could be better. So there is a quality issue here. That's part of this problem. The second part is that it's really hard for us to know if and how a training impacted on the ground, both in terms of learner outcomes and business outcomes. But for me, it's pretty shocking that regardless of whether it's a quality problem or a measuring problem, at best we achieve, as an industry globally, a 12% rate of like proven application and transfer. So the harsh reality is that 88% of everything that we all do every day is scrap, or at least is not what was intended, which was for it to have a measurable impact on either learner and or business. And I think for me, and you'll have heard me say this before, and I'm definitely going to say it again, I might even start to get some merchandise with this on, but the biggest risk of AI right now in L&D is that it is enabling us to do what we already do faster and cheaper. And if you go down to the exhibition space downstairs, you'll find a lot of big organizations promising that AI will now make it much faster and cheaper to produce training, and help you to achieve KPIs around efficiency. But what we're not doing as an industry, and I take responsibility for this as well, is acknowledging that before we start to scale the machine, we need to acknowledge that it's broken, or at least it's not optimized. And so I think what we're seeing right now is, as I said earlier, the emergence of two flavors of strategy, let's say. One acknowledges that L&D needs to be fixed before it needs to be scaled. The other focuses much more on short-term gains and on solving KPIs that are much more common than transform the system, so things like reduce the cost and increase velocity. And so these are the two flavors. The vast majority, I should say as well, the vast majority of us are using AI. I did a global survey with Synthesia in September last year, and it came back that then 85% of us were using AI regularly in our day-to-day work. 60-odd% it was every day. And since then, that has been growing. So we can make the assumption here that we're talking about a lot of people using a lot of AI in L&D. And what we're seeing is that they are using AI within two different strategic approaches, and the vast majority are using AI for automation. So the direction from the leadership is use AI to become more efficient and to optimize for speed and for cost. And around about 90% of use, this is some research that I'm doing that's ongoing, but right now from some samples, it looks like in Fortune 500, so large corporate L&D teams, 90% of AI use is about faster and cheaper. And then we have this other interesting niche, which is emerging but very interesting, which is much more focused on the quality problem and the impact problem. So around about 10% of L&D leaders in some specific industries, and maybe we can dig into that a little bit more when we have a chat, but are focusing much more on AI for augmentation. So thinking about use cases for AI which will actually help us to get better at analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation, rather than just trying to take that process and system and make it faster and cheaper. So they're trying to rebuild the machine before we scale it. And this really is where we are at right now. And this, therefore, is the typical AI L&D tech stack. I don't know if this looks familiar to anyone, but one of the things I always do is to ask L&D teams to tell me what sorts of technologies they're investing in and how they're using them. And this is the answer. So we're seeing the use of enterprise generic AI tools for analysis, specifically for rapid survey generation, first and foremost for that. We're seeing tools like Easy Generator and Articulate AI. I don't know if you're familiar with these, but essentially it's a kind of PDF in, e-learning course out. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but an automated system of instructional design, let's say, and development. We're seeing quite a lot of investment in those kind of tools, and also in the design stage, the use of ChatGPT and Copilot for ideas generation, thinking about different activities, different approaches that we might take in this kind of thing. In development, this will not be any news to you, but this is where most of the cash goes when there is an AI budget or a technology budget. Synthesia, they're downstairs, they're doing very well, because they make the very painful and slow and expensive process of making video much faster. And so I think to me it's very telling that most of the investment is here in the space where we're seeing the automation of processes that are slow and expensive. So it kind of proves the point to me that for most people, the AI strategy in L&D is faster and cheaper. Evaluation, similar to analysis, we're not really doing much here at all other than speeding up the process of, for example, writing evaluation surveys, maybe generating the data and doing some light analysis. But fundamentally, the system is the same. We're just using different tools to do the same tasks faster and cheaper. And as you can see, some of the stats are astonishing, and you can imagine like CEOs' eyes are lighting up at the fact that L&D has now increased its velocity significantly and reduced the costs. It's like the golden triangle that we thought was never possible. But of course, and this is always my point, because I'm like my job is to be the grumpy British person, that these kind of gains come with some, I think, significant costs at the same time. And I think it comes with significant costs, as far as I can see, on three different levels. And the first is the business level. And there's been quite a lot of research, I think, by Gartner, the Harvard Business Review, and a couple of others that have shown, and this is outside of L&D, but there's a lot we can learn from other industries. And they've shown that those businesses which lean too far into AI automation see higher employee and client churn, reduced innovation, and reduced likelihood to be market leaders. This, I think, is taken from an example of call center staff. So some organizations took transcripts from call center conversations, turned them into a bot, fired 90% of the workforce. I think maybe that happened at BT, but don't quote me. Some organizations have used AI in order to cut headcount and automate processes. But already we are seeing the negative implications of that and actually reversals on that. So if you ever need a very strong business case for why we shouldn't just be going about automating processes, this is it. In the medium to long term, it has very negative implications for the business in the market. The other angle that I've been digging into as well is instructional designers. So how are they feeling about it? And similar to the sentiment that was shared a few minutes ago, this is a typical quote from an interview that I did last month, that I'm concerned that my role is being reduced to finding content to feed to AI. So this idea that, we take a PDF from a subject matter expert, we put it into an AI authoring tool, it makes the course, and then next. And so there's this feeling of like sausage factory is a phrase that is probably not expected to hear this evening, but is one that I hear quite a lot. There's this sense of fear, but also like the beginnings of some discontent, I would say, understandably, amongst instructional design. And then this is an employee, again, from some interviews I did last month, and this was a really good point, I thought, which is like, we've been given this potentially disruptive technology. If you think about AI outside of L&D, I mean, it's basically disrupted everything except education and healthcare. But if you think about like how you watch TV, how you get a cab, how you order food, how you listen to music, everything has been disrupted by AI, machine learning. And we have really not been disrupted in that kind of way at all, in a kind of transformative way. And if anything, the one big problem that we've had over the past few decades, because we haven't transformed, is too much content. And now there's this new, I think, resurgence of this feeling amongst learners on the ground, and we don't ask them what they think enough, I think, but that we're just getting more stuff. So yes, we can now create 10 courses where we could create one, but there is this feeling of overwhelm, and it's like a new AI-generated overwhelm of content. It's basically the LMS, like the LMS cognitive load problem, but in a new kind of shiny jacket. And yeah, I think this is really valid, and already, again, this is emerging, so don't quote me on it yet necessarily, but really interesting as well that already we seem to see some employees in organizations rejecting AI-generated content. There seems to be, and I think there's a lot we don't yet understand about, yeah, we can make, let's say, 200 videos that look as if they're presented by the CEO, but how do organizations feel about them, particularly in a learning context? And there's some really interesting research to show that AI-generated video can be as effective for learning as a human-presented video, but only if you don't tell the learner that it's AI. And so there's a very interesting ethical dilemma. I mean, I don't think it is an ethical dilemma. I think we need to tell them. But there is an interesting question here around, we're just making loads of stuff and not really thinking, but is it actually, what's going to actually happen on the ground? If we don't just look at the cost and the speed KPIs, actually what difference is this going to make? So yeah, watch this space for, I think, some interesting, again, backlash. Just a feeling of unease about this new wave of avatars. And it's very interesting that AI avatars in videos and voice, they're all on this fast track. They're all kind of competing to try and become as convincing as possible. So if you look at roadmaps of companies like HeyGen and Synthesia and 11 Labs for voice, they're all trying to get to a point where you just can't tell if it's AI or human. But again, huge ethical implications there. And I think a lot of assumptions being made about, if we build it, will they come? It's like, if we make the AI content, will it actually lead to more learning? We don't know yet, but, we seem to be making a lot of content on the assumption that it will be fine, but it's TBC. Okay, so I'm just gonna just shift on now and think about the augmentation. So keep in mind, 90% of people are on automation strategy, automation KPIs, speed, cost. But there's this small, interesting, emerging 10% which are much more focused on using AI and L&D for augmentation. And one of the main things that they do different is that they ask a different question. So instead of asking how can we make it faster and cheaper to produce training, they ask instead how can we use AI to build an L&D system that increases the 12% rate of impact. So before we scale it, how do we actually make it work? And And I think there's a few things that sets them apart, but I thought instead of maybe the most interesting way of doing this is actually just sharing some examples. So what I've done is I've thought about this through the lens of ADDIE. And so what I'm going to do is just quickly spin through some examples of what an automation strategy looks like and an augmentation strategy at each stage of ADDIE. So analysis, in most places that use AI, most organizations, AI is used by instructional designers to speed up the creation of needs assessment or needs analysis surveys. So again, functional task completion. But where augmentation strategies are applied, we're seeing much more innovative things. So for example, AI being used by designers to conduct really deep diagnostic analysis of new different types of data. So they look at business KPIs, they look at performance data, they look at external trends, and they use all of this information to understand, okay, how are people currently performing and where do we need to get them to? And so instead of there being this kind of best guess, or who's the loudest voice in the room when you choose what training to create, we're seeing more data-informed decision-making at the needs analysis stage. And I love this example from Norsk Hydro that you might have seen before. But it's a really good example. They use AI to basically map all of the roles at the organization to a skills taxonomy of where we want to be, where we need to be in order to be whatever, to achieve our KPIs. And what that enabled them to do was using in an evidence data-informed way, identified gaps in training and what priority training is needed to be. So it's just basically a really great example of what an augmented approach to AI and analysis looks like. When it comes to design, as I say, we're seeing quite a lot of instructional designers being asked to use AI tools which auto-generate, and this is not my language, this is language that I've heard from the ground, but auto-generate standardized training outlines based on standardized kind of 12% templates and established practices. So more and more instructional designers, to your point earlier, are being expected to use AI to work independently and just pump more stuff out. But what we're getting is the standardization of, at best, I think, medium quality, because that's kind of how AI works. In the augmentation model, there is an emerging trend of specialized AI tools. These, again, are a very small minority. Full disclosure, this example, this is me, because this is actually a research project that I'm doing. But the reason that I'm doing this research project with Epiphany AI is that in other industries where we've seen AI make a really positive, constructive impact on professionals, what we've seen is that we've started to build tools which are tailored to specific workflows for specific tasks to make it easier for those people to make data-informed decisions and basically be better at their job. Cursor is a great example. Coding is way ahead of us here. Coders started by using generic AI tools, sped them up, quality wasn't great. They now have tools like Cursor that understand the coding workflow, they understand what great coding looks like, and what's happened is that those professionals have been elevated. And we're seeing a similar emerging trend in L&D. And so, yeah, some specialized AI tools which are fine-tuned on up-to-date research, which are built for the L&D workflow, and which essentially enable people to be able to make evidence-based decisions on what should the training be, what should be the format, what's the content, what's the activity, based on research, on industry research and pedagogical research and lots of other things, so that they're not making best guesses or just following habit, they are actually optimizing training. And we've tested this hypothesis that by connecting designers to evidence, to be able to make evidence-based decisions, that we are able to increase the quality of training. And what we found so far is that by connecting designers to the science, we've seen a 75% uplift in the quality of training design. That's blind scoring by expert learning designers. And also a 75% uplift in the likely rate of learning transfer. So we're going from 12% to 75% just by making it easier to make smarter decisions, which of course is very different from automating the established process. When it comes to development, no surprise, lots of instructional designers are using AI to generate videos and audios and e-learning. This is maybe the most exciting use case for me. You might have read this recent article which was produced by some academics, and they worked with P&G. But essentially, what happened here was they created an AI teammate for some consultants, and they did a control test by looking at how did the consultants who had access to their little AI teammate perform versus those who did not. And what they found was really interesting. So they found that when you have a co-pilot who understands your work and can help you to fill knowledge gaps and ask questions and essentially help you to problem solve in the flow of work, what we found is that they were able to produce outputs 12% faster than people who didn't work with AI. And also, maybe most interestingly, there was a 3x increase in the likelihood of the quality of the output being in the top tier, in the top, I think, 10%, something like that. And so this is really interesting to me, because I think what we're seeing is that there is this future vision for instructional designers, which is not just, document in and then next document in. It's more about like instructional designers becoming much more specialized and being responsible for co-designing these kind of AI teammates, designing systems, designing interactions, principles, and quality measures in order to enable organizations to move in this direction, and more organizations are, where we no longer have like courses and classrooms and content, but we have coaches, we have always-on support, we have like learning in the flow of work as we always imagined it, I suppose. And I think as a side note, we're a bit obsessed with learning in the flow of work and one-to-one coaching, and I think the solution will always be bigger than this. But this is a really, really interesting use case, which I'm going to be keeping my eye on very closely. And then, evaluation. Most instructional designers using AI to write post-course surveys and quiz scores and analyze quiz scores and completion metrics, getting data from the LMS, whatever. But we're also seeing like the emergence of much more interesting things. So at Deloitte, they have like this AI ROI analyzer that solves this wicked problem of being able to know, did that learning intervention actually lead to any change in behavior and performance and attitude and whatever. And using AI, they have created this tool, again, a specialized tool for a specific workflow and a specific function, but which is able to track data so that it can, with certain levels of confidence, predict and then validate what the outcome of a training was for the learner and for the business. And so that's another really interesting thing that we should keep our eye on. And so I think there are 4 characteristics of like these AI innovators in L&D that sets them apart. I've been observing them a little bit. I think the first thing to say is that leading a strategy for augmentation is much more difficult than automation. Automation is kind of business as usual. It's like same old KPIs as ever. We need to get faster. We need to be cheaper. In order to actually acknowledge that the machine is broken and that we maybe need to rethink everything and change roles and change technologies and play with AI, that's kind of scary, particularly when there's IP and all these things going on, is much more difficult. But these are the things which they do. So they set an ambitious AI-first vision for L&D, which goes beyond faster and cheaper, but it actually basically challenges the L&D department to prove improved impact through the use of AI. And related to that, they set the strategic rather than tactical KPIs. So it's not about can we make it faster and cheaper, it's about can we prove that we brought more business value to the organization than we did last year. The other thing that's really interesting, I think, is that we're seeing L&D teams that are super innovative becoming more like R&D teams. And so instead of just, I guess, going to the market and buying a tool to do a job, what these organizations do different is that they run short A/B tests. So we already have quite a lot of data on like how much things currently cost and how long they currently take. And we can generate impact data if we want by talking to our learners and other things. And we can quite quickly generate a baseline and then do a controlled test, a bit like the P&G thing, where you can then compare, basically form a hypothesis about the positive impact of AI and do a test and build a business case. And so at a high level, what that means is that instead of just being a functional L&D team, L&D is kind of almost evolving a little bit to be R&D, which I think is super interesting. But also new, needs resource, it needs different skills, it needs bravery, all sorts of things. The other thing is to work closely with AI engineers. One thing that most of those innovators that I just showed you have in common is that they aren't just consumers of AI, they're builders of AI. And again, this goes back to the generic versus a specialized tool thing, in that we need to work, I think, as L&D professionals and educators, kind of shoulder to shoulder with engineers and help them to build more specialized and strategic tools that have real benefits for us, rather than us just consuming stuff and then hoping it has a positive impact, which it might, but that we can take control of this. We're at a point where we're building products. And so those organizations that are doing this really well have started to bring together squads of L&D people and AI engineers and have them work side by side to build stuff, test it, and then see. Okay, so I just wanted to do one fun thing before I shut up, because I know I'm talking a lot. But one thing I like to do with AI is to ask it to predict stuff based on data. And so I asked it, if I was giving a paper at Learning Technologies 2026, what might L&D look like based on the data that we have right now, based on the direction that we're moving in. I also asked it to generate me an image to represent like the general mood and vibe, and this is what we came up with. So, and I didn't tell it to make it like macabre or dystopian. It just knows that it's not a good idea. But anyway, this is ChatGPT 4.0. And this is based on, I'm not saying this is like entirely reliable because AI, but it is based on data. So I gave it data of right now and said, if I continue doing this, where will we be this time next year? And this is the answer. So AI's boosted production by 40 to 60%. Yet adoption hovers still around 12% because we've not solved the quality problem. Employees suffer from content overload and standardized training, which leads to more disengagement and fatigue than ever before. So those KPIs are red. L&D teams face de-skilling, which is negatively impacting the team productivity and adaptability and innovation. So there's going to be some negative business consequences there. And there's also the over-automation of roles, including instructional design roles, which increases employee and customer churn. So it's not great news, but I quite enjoy the image. And then I also asked it to give me a visualization for this other speculative future. So if we all like go the other way and like invest in the augmentation strategy, what happens then? And we got this image with the kind of typical text fault, just to prove that it is AI. Although I made a typo earlier, so who knows? And then this is the situation. Again, it's a rose-tinted view, but it gives you an idea. There is a very different endpoint. This time next year, we no longer have a 12% transfer problem. 75, maybe 80% of what we design is actually having an impact on the business. We have this always-on AI coaching, so we're no longer like going to work and stopping and doing a course and then going back to work. We are in the situation where like AI colleagues almost, designed by super smart instructional designers, have actually increased productivity across our organizations by, on average, 40%, which is a real statistic, so it's pretty wow. The L&D teams who are using AI to innovate are 25 to 40% faster than their competitors and also 17% more likely to lead in their market because they're doing smart things with AI. And we also have some fabulous ROI tools, which means that we know what the return on investment is for every single dollar or pound or euro, whatever, is invested into L&D. So we've kind of opened up the black box a little bit, but also we're just doing a better job, not just on quality, but on speed and cost. But it's almost like we've been able to achieve, that golden triangle of faster, cheaper, and better. And of course, they're just stories, who knows? I think the one thing that I would like to close on before we go over to chat is that this question, will we use AI to scale a broken system or build something different and better? I think sometimes when we talk about AI, we talk about it as if it's like got its own force and we're just watching what's going to happen and we are powerless. In fact, that simply isn't true. And hopefully one thing that all of this research has shown you is that ultimately the impact that AI has in L&D and on instructional design depends on the decisions made by the humans who invest in the technology, who build the technology, who build out the organization. So whether or not we're going to just end up scaling this broken system or actually use this as an opportunity to build something new and different and more effective in the next, say, 12 months is much more about humans than it is about technology. And yeah, that's it from me. Thank you, folks. Oh, thank you.
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
So the mic's working?
Yep.
And temperature's okay? Because that was really hot for about 10 minutes and now I'm freezing again. We're going to go into a bit of a Q&A. So before, I've got like 74 awesome questions here. Before I get into these, anybody got a burning question from the audience about what you've just seen? Or a burning observation about what you've just seen? The young lady with a grey tracky hoodie, coat, not quite sure.
Thank you. I want to start with a very quick feedback. I think this is the first session where I don't feel gaslighted when it comes to AI, because most of the sessions talk a lot about the benefits of AI, which is amazing, but I'm cautiously optimistic when it comes to the technology, and I feel we don't talk enough about the problems that will show up while using AI that we will need to solve. And I feel like talking about these problems will also make us being a step ahead of them. So thank you so much for this. And secondly, I wanted to ask you if you've seen any research or any signals regarding that if the use of AI will slow down or be a blocker when it comes to collaboration or social learning, and if you see that as a problem or not.
Yeah, no, great question. Thank you for the positive feedback as well. As I say, it's my kind of brand to be grumpy British person, so thank you, guys, appreciate it. Yeah, I do think that we are obsessed with this concept of hyper-personalized, independent, always on, like basically creating individual level silos. And I think there is certainly partly because we've been obsessed with that for quite a while, like since like Socrates and the Romans. It was the height of civilization to have your own, sage on the side. Partly because of that, there's been quite a lot of research, and so we have a lot of research that says that there are benefits for this, and that's great. We know there are. But we have less research and less understanding about what's the formula for a really great connected learning experience. If and when those learning experiences might be preferable to something that is one-to-one, and the impact, therefore, that we might have if we go so deep on personalization at the cost of these other things. And I have noticed, certainly, and I'm sure other people have, that, there are so many conversations, products, experiments going on with this one-to-one personalization model, and much less on what can AI do to connect us? There are some really interesting things going on. I think there's an innovation lab at MIT, and they're looking at how AI can essentially find characteristics of different people and connect them together, to form communities of people that they know will get on or succeed together. But certainly there's a gap there, and I think, my advice would be to always start with understanding what is the value and the risk of every single type of learning experience, and then think about, using that information, think about what sorts of technologies to invest in and whatever. But also a huge gap in the market. So if anyone wants to build a AI tool for social learning, connected learning, and then bring it to the exhibition next year, I'm sure you'd be very popular.
Cool. And any other questions from the audience? Oh, the young lady up front.
Hello. I really liked your phrase, scaling a broken system. Did I get that right? Yeah. And one thing that I've observed is there's all this enthusiasm for experimentation and trying to do things differently. But then actually, L&D obviously exists in a broader ecosystem, and things like GDPR, data security, IT security, there are policies that are basically putting immediate barriers to it. And so then the obvious route for people is to scale what they already have. So like if their LMS is now introducing AI features, it's nice and easy to switch that on, and you're engaging with this innovation or storyline, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess, is it a question, is it an observation? Do you have any thoughts around how does L&D influence that broader thing so that they can actually, like the social learning AI, like that would take open access to an internet that if you work for a large financial organisation would just be like no.
Yeah.
So what can we do to move in a bigger pond, I guess is my question.
No, it's a great point and a great question. I think, just to get back to what I said before, it's definitely much harder to go the augmentation route, and to even just to adopt AI is challenging. I mean, one of the reasons that there's been a spike at the end of last year in the use of AI in L&D is just that we're allowed to now, because we waited so long for the enterprise version of ChatGPT or Copilot, which protects IP and follows all of these procedures. And so I think there's also, yes, it's an important point to acknowledge that I think transformation will be very slow, particularly, I mean, in L&D in general, we're very slow to innovate. Again, I mentioned so many different industries have been disrupted, and we just really haven't. If you go downstairs and look at the different exhibitors and the technology, it's not so different from how it looked 10, 15, maybe even 20 years ago. And so I think it will be slow. I think what the people who are being more successful are doing is carving out some space to run small controlled tests. So it's that point again around L&D becoming more like R&D. I've been part of tests where we've used non-confidential information to test a hypothesis that if we use this specific tool, we might be able to improve the impact of training for people who do physical jobs and this kind of thing. And so one of my recommendations would definitely be to start very small with very small controlled tests in order to essentially build a business case. And the second that you can say, look, this would save X amount of money, be X amount cheaper, and lead to better business outcomes, then people listen. And so it's just about building enough data to be able to make a case to push for change. But you're absolutely right. I mean, again, it depends on our appetite for change, and there are so many incumbent technologies which are forcing us, I think, more down the automation route than the augmentation. It will be hard. It will be hard to be able to innovate in this kind of industry with this kind of infrastructure.
And we have the young gentleman at the back with his arm raised.
Thank you. I have a remark and a question, by the way. So I'm from Easy Generator. You mentioned us. And it's true that we have a course builder that creates courses from PDF and that does the instructor design. Mm-hmm. I'm one of the designers of that. But the goal of that is not to create learning faster and cheaper. The goal is quality. Easy Generator is used for SMEs who create learning content. Mm-hmm. They don't have instructor design knowledge, so we try to put it in. Mm-hmm. And the goal is actually to make actionable learning. So we ask questions to them. So what do people need to be able to do after they finish the course, not what do they need to know. So we try to push them in that direction. So that brings me to my question. Do you think it's possible to create an AI tool like that generates learning, uses the knowledge and insights of an SME, of an employee who knows how things are done, but actually turns it in proper, actionable learning?
Yeah, I love the question, thank you. But yeah, you're right. And so this is the other thing that I didn't touch on actually, but it's another trend is that we're seeing, I think, maybe as part of the automation thing, but what's often referred to as the democratization of instructional design. So enabling a subject matter expert to design something with guardrails in order to meet this demand for more speed, more velocity. And I think that's also an interesting conversation in itself. Should we be democratizing instructional design? Maybe. Can we help SMEs become great instructional designers? Perhaps. What does that mean? One of the trends that I've seen in the pre-AI world, there was a bit of a trend, I don't know what it would have been, maybe 5-10 years ago, of trying to solve that problem by giving out more Articulate licenses. The new flavor of this is giving out Synthesia licenses, and we kind of ended up with more content of poor standard because, I know my stuff, I don't know my design. But yeah, to your question around whether that's possible, I think that's the hypothesis that I'm testing right now. Is it possible to create a system which provides us with an indication of, if the input is this, a business problem and a certain learner profile, and the goal is this behavior change or this knowledge gain or whatever it is there an optimal route from A to B? And is it possible to map that? I think it's challenging right now because we have so little data. It's part of this wicked problem. We have so little data actually on what works and what doesn't work, what works better than this and that. But there is enough. There is enough to build a machine. There is enough academic research and control tests from the industry out there to be able to actually start to build that machine. And then through building the machine, we surface more data to understand more than ever about how humans learn. So I think we're at the very beginning of it. I think it's possible, and I think if we crack it, it will open up this black box, this mystery of actually how humans learn, and enable us to build these kind of ecosystems where we can have, the machine analyzing our needs, designing the best thing, giving us evaluation data, and then, just this almost autonomous ecosystem, which sounds wild, but is already happening. Like at P&G, it's a reality that I think they're going to invest in. So, yeah, I think it's possible.
Cool. We have two more. I do have one question as an L&D HR professional for you. So you've mentioned the 90%, 10%, and we've seen P&G and other companies. How did they get to be using the augmentation side of it? Because I think you made a point then, which is, how do L&D get access to it? How do we open a door? We're only using the enterprise version stuff because when we have, how do you get past that kind of barrier? What tips have you got around that?
Yeah, and I think it is about what those organizations did different is they've carved out some space for some experimentation. They are working very closely with AI teams. This is one of the reasons that we're seeing this happen first in enterprise, is that they have, the resource or they already have, I don't know, a resource to build, or they already have an AI team. And so they're working really closely together to understand, what are our strategic goals as an organization? And therefore, and then asking the question, what sort of AI would help, and then building it and testing it. So I think it's the freedom to do that is super important. But there is also something, as I mentioned, about the leadership and the thought leadership and the vision. And what we're seeing is that a lot of those innovations of that sort that I just showed are being led by a kind of younger generation of L&D leader who has, an appetite to disrupt. But they, again, are a minority. And, who knows what the stat is, but most L&D leaders are of an older generation who have less appetite, who are more focused on business as usual, and also have more of a vested interest, I guess, in things staying as they are rather than changing. So it's an interesting kind of formula, which is a combination of they're given the time and the space and the expertise to experiment and build stuff and actually test it, but they're also being led by people who set these ambitious visions and KPIs. And we're seeing more and more organizations have AI-first L&D strategies, and I think that's what they're referring to.
Okay. Cool. And we did have, lots of hands. The person in the second row.
I have a question about epiphany. You said that one of the metrics was there was a 75% uplift on quality of training, as well as rate of transfer. Just curious as to how you measured those.
Yeah, great question. So we have a set of quality standards that were agreed by academics. So from the information that we have in front of us, which is either from industry reports or from behavioral science, psychology, learning science, different types of research, what do those pieces of research, which have all met a criteria for number of citations and this kind of thing, but what does the research tell us about what an optimal journey is from A to B when the goal is behavior change or knowledge gain or confidence gain? So essentially we have a set of quality standards for what optimal looks like as far as we understand from the research. And then the trainees produced by Epiphany were blind scored with a control test, which were designs created without AI. And then there was a third controlled test group which designed trainings with generic AI, so with either ChatGPT or Copilot. And so we were able to compare all three across the different things and then get a quality assessment. And they were blind scored by experts in instructional design, so people with 7 or more years of experience in corporate L&D and instructional design. And then in terms of the learning transfer, what we did was we gave the same designs. So again, they were blind. Nobody knew what was what, but we had these designs that were created with ChatGPT and Copilot just by humans and by this specialized AI tool. And we gave the training to the learners and had them self-report basically the scrap learning score. So what percentage of this thing will you actually apply in your job tomorrow, in 3 months, 6 months? And so that's how we measured the relative uplift in learning transfer as well. So it's at the very beginning of an experiment because we then want to then go back and track, did it actually correspond with increased performance and this kind of thing. But for now, that's how we landed with those like criteria and measurements.
Thanks a lot for your contribution. I was wondering, as instructional designers, we are often challenged with the word impact or measuring behaviors, habits after the learning experience. Have you got any case to share where this AI for augmentation can play a role in observing or collecting evidences rather on a behavioral environment rather than technical skills, where KPIs maybe do not exist yet, and unconventional indicators must come up?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think the answer is yes. So there's a number of experiments going on. I'm not involved in them, but I know of them. So in terms of like, how do we actually know if it changed their behavior? Performance, you can imagine, we can do like a qualitative analysis of a performance review and kind of start to correlate stuff. But actually like on-the-ground behavior. So one concrete example is an organization which is, again, it's got a control group. So it's got a group of people who had a specific type of coaching, I think for leadership. And then a control group that didn't have the coaching. And then they compare how they behave by doing deep, I think mostly qualitative analysis on things like, I don't know, how do they communicate in an email? How do they write a slide deck? I don't know. Even some are going so far as to like record audio. So it might be something about influencing skills. And so essentially there's an amount of tracking of data that gives an insight into behavior. There are some organizations who are also looking at like Teams and Slack channels and communication to understand, did this behavior reflect in whatever? Did it have a positive impact on performance, but also on mood and like culture and all these things? So there's some really interesting ways that are emerging which enable us to just look at different sorts of data and try to track it back to interventions. I think on that there is a really important point, like a question about ethics. It's like, how do you feel about your employer, for your well-being, for your professional development, being able to see, listen into your Zoom calls, see your emails, read your DMs on Teams. I mean, who knows? And maybe this is happening already, but I think there's a lot of experimentation going on, but in order for anything like that to be implemented, we need to understand there's a big implementation risk because, basically the AI becomes more powerful the more data that we give to it, but there is also a line at which there is an amount of like responsibility, I don't know, discomfort, all of these things. So again, ultimately it comes down to humans. How comfortable are we, tapping, like mining for that information, and then how comfortable are we as employees to give it away?
Yeah. Cool. Yes, sir.
So Phil, have you done any research on capability enablement independent of learning where people don't have to learn? So as an example, like I think of the Matrix and Neo and Trinity looking at the helicopter and like, can you fly that thing? And she goes, well, hang on 1 second. But if you remove the tool that allows the capability, they lose the superpower, right? So
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah. And yeah, actually the P&G experiment reminded me a bit of the Matrix. And this is the vision. I can share this maybe, I'm not going to name names, but I'm doing some strategy work right now, L&D leadership at 2 Fortune 500s, and the vision is, and it's not quite Matrix, but it is much more like kill the course, kill the classroom, kill the content focus, and essentially manage and drive performance. And if you're as old as me, you might remember the little paperclip that sometimes used to jump up on MS Word. And it's essentially like, when people say to me, what does AI look like? I was like, it's that freaking paperclip that we all hated. But there is this sense of AI, we no longer stop and learn and go back to work. AI enables us, if we want it, to essentially fill knowledge gaps, do some tasks, some parts of the task, like whatever it is, in the flow of work. And at that point, learning becomes invisible because essentially it's support, it's performance support, it's feedback, I don't know what it is. but it's not a stop and do and come back. And I think for a long time we have had this vision of learning in the flow of work and, being responsive to need at the point of need and all of these things. And so maybe if we want it, AI will help us to deliver that. And certainly it seems to be possible. I think it's interesting that even when the AI support that was provided to employees was not specialized, so it's the equivalent of like the Matrix just being a generic, like, helpful paperclip. But even then, there was a 40% increase in productivity for some, an even greater increase in productivity for non-experts, which I think is interesting. Like, that journey of going from 0 to expert is now like... so yeah, there's a huge amount of potential there, and I think it's... Again, right now it's a vision. I also then think, but if you look at the technology that we have actually managed to implement and the innovation that we have had in the industry, it's been so minute that would be an unprecedented change. But again, if we want it, I think that would be possible.
I have another question, even though my mic has gone off. Can you hear me back? If you couldn't, you're going to say nothing, so silly question. But anyway, what kind of skills do you think we need to do the augmentation piece? I've guided a session around skills earlier about what skills employees need. What kind of skills do we need, do you think, as a community?
No, it's a great question. I think first of all, just understanding what AI can do, that can be really hard. And again, it's about trying to like psychologically position yourself as a co-creator of AI rather than just a consumer or like a receiver of it. And I think the best way to do that is just to be part of the community and to look at what other people who are working in this space and innovating in this space, see what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, my number one tip is always just AI literacy. You don't have to understand how to build, a machine learning model, but you do need to understand, what do you consider to be the biggest problems or the things that are holding you back, and then to be able to understand if and how, or at least just form a hypothesis about if and how AI might be able to help you. So for me, it's about understanding just some of the basic different potential use cases of AI. And at a very high level, it's automation, like AI for doing stuff humans do, or it's going deeper. But I think that AI literacy and just, I think as an industry, in a profession, we can do a much better job of sharing more stuff. Like all of this stuff was news to me. I went out and found it, but it was happening already. And so I think there's also something there for us to learn from one another and inspire one another. But right now, if I talk to an L&D professional, instructional designer, the overwhelming emotion is fear, and it's like, I'm not an engineer. There's this sense of like our identity is very much like arts and humanities and not sciences, and so it's scary. But it's possible to be able to be, you are an expert in your industry. You need to make sure that you're able to talk AI with engineers and to hopefully co-create whatever these tools are that we're going to end up using.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
Hi. I just want to go back slightly where you were talking about sort of a vision, right? And sort of the vision being kill the course, kill the classroom, drive performance, right? Which is kind of a takeaway from a lot of what I've heard today. And so my company in particular, we're in this kind of position where we've got a lot of kind of outdated sort of content, and now we're building an L&D team. And there's a lot of pressure coming from top down around that sort of automation, build more courses. Our competitor has loads of them, we want loads of them too. And then there's this kind of, how do we balance that sort of desire for sort of moving in the direction of the vision, whilst at the same time sort of having that pressure to kind of create a lot more of what we currently do? How do we balance those two things?
Yeah. No, it's a really great point, and I think you're absolutely right. Like, there is a reality where, like, business as usual, and my KPI this year is still more courses. It is faster. And I should say that these two visions, like strategies, whatever, are not mutually exclusive. So in those organizations where there is more experimentation with the augmentation side of things, there is also investment in Synthesia, Articulate AI, and these kind of things. And so again, it's about maybe not the whole L&D team becoming an R&D team, but I would recommend that you maybe have, an amount of the team that's dedicated to business as usual and to hitting those short-term, more tactical KPIs. And then this, a squad, and it can be super small, of people who have the freedom to experiment and to test if and how we might be able to use whatever. It might be different technologies, it might be different processes, principles. I don't know, it's not just about AI, but to experiment and to actually do controlled tests to see what a different approach might look like. And if you can, like from experience, if you can run enough experiments, and it's not actually, you don't actually have to do that much work. I know it sounds scary, but like short experiments and generate data on speed, cost, quality increases, then you have a business case. And then that experiment becomes a pilot, becomes a whatever. But yeah, it's almost like you have to spin the two plates and try and have a foot in both the short term and the medium to longer term.
And can I just add to that? I think one of the things also is if you get your customers, who are your colleagues, involved and they love it, create that movement from inside as well. Get people talking about how this is much, much better, or this is really cool, and utilize that. I think one of the sessions earlier was talking about our role is almost like a marketeer now, or a comms person. You also use that kind of knowledge to actually drive the fact that you can do these cool things, and you've got the feedback coming from within as well.
Yeah, it's a really important point, and also this idea of like bottom-up innovation. So when you're running these short tests, typically we would run them with, let's say instructional designers on the ground, and yeah, if they love it, great. If they don't, next. And there's a feeling of, so that we can use them as ambassadors when they do love it, but there's also a feeling of like, you're not having AI done to you, which is something that I think people often feel. It's a bit like, just, let me know what my fate is. It's this, like, culturally, it can be really great to just get people in. And like I say, don't go to them with answers and statements, go to them with hypotheses, and maybe even co-create the hypothesis. Like, if we use AI for X, we might be able to Y or whatever. And then have a go and involve them. But yeah, I think it's a really important point, yeah.
I think we have time for maybe 1.5 more questions. Just as a heads up.
Good evening. Really like the talk. So thank you for breaking it down so practically along with a model like Addy that you used. I think I'd just request you to elaborate a bit when you made as a passing remark on a gap where AI tool for connected learning is something that is untapped. I just want to understand what does that look like and what is the potential there?
Yeah, and thank you. And I might be doing some companies a disservice here, but I think what we're seeing overwhelmingly is when you look at technology for education, it's not just corporate L&D, higher ed, K-12, there is this emphasis of hyper-personalized, even in the classroom, you've got like huge organizations like Microsoft finding ways for teachers to give hyper-personalized experience to students who are sitting next to each other. And so I think there is just much more exploration, research cache, whatever it is, put into tools which give us all our own teacher, effectively, rather than tools which try to connect us together. But as I say, there is some research going on here. I don't know if, for example, downstairs there's any commercial tools that are being developed. I don't think so, because it seems to be a very compelling vision to say, a coach for every. But yeah, on a more academic level, like I say, in innovative institutions like MIT, where they do a lot of just playing around with things, there's some really interesting technologies, like AI technologies, being built to, instead of put everybody in a little silo, actually bring people together, people with shared interests, people who can perhaps do knowledge sharing. It's been happening actually in the world of medicine for quite a while, where you can kind of connect with people who are outside of your discipline because, AI helped to recognize some trends in research, all of these kind of things. So whether or not this will ever, hit us and, meet us at L&D, I don't know, but I think right now it's overwhelmingly about the personal. And I think that's partly because we've just all felt the pain of the generic. It's like, no, let's go. We'll probably see a situation where we go from generic to hyper-personal and then maybe just come out a little bit more or diversify a little bit. But right now we're on the fast track to having your one-to-one coach and not talking to any humans.
Cool. And we have the final half question.
Half a question.
Hi, sorry, this is probably going to end it on a little bit of a bum note, actually. But my question was, I'm working in the charity sector. We have very, very kind of firm sustainability pledges. And I think my question was kind of how do we marry the kind of increased impact that an L&D team might have by integrating AI into workflows with kind of firm sustainability pledges, knowing the environmental impact that AI has.
No, it's a really great point, and it's like, yeah, it's one of those things, you were saying before, Lavinia, about like gaslighting. It's like, it's one of the things that we don't really talk about. But yeah, if we keep in mind that, for every, I don't know what the stat is, but, we're essentially like spending a bottle of water every, time we ask ChatGPT to write us a poem about, the cat. It's a real challenge. And I guess it's a challenge that's bigger than L&D. But one which requires us to think, I think even more so, if we think about this future where we're just creating more and more stuff all the time, and that there's very little return on that investment, that feels like a much less sustainable and responsible approach than one that says, no, there are these, 10 specific use cases where if we invest the time and the resource into them, we get more than the value back. Does feel more sustainable and responsible. But yeah, it's a great point. And yeah, the costs of AI are not just, for humans, they are also for, the globe and the environment.
And I think maybe one of the other ways, unfortunately, we had the last half question, but you're going to be here afterwards for the young lady in the white top. But I think one of the other things you mentioned was around sharing. So if you do know and you do have done something which is amazing, if you share, you're not recreating the wheel. And I think as an industry, we have events like this where we share, but also there's other communities we can share as well. So maybe thinking about how and what we do, and is it the first time it's been done, is approach as well.
Yeah.
So I am going to say, we're probably 2 minutes over, so I am going to close. I know you're all feeling really sad. I know you're thinking, we could go for another hour or so. Do you want to just give, if I just have one takeaway from what you've said over the last hour and 10 minutes, what would that one takeaway be for the audience, would you say?
Gosh. I would say, forget the technology, look at the research and find out what great looks like. We don't have all the answers, but we actually know an awful lot about what great looks like. And I always recommend doing it maybe like, however you want to do it, but you can break it down into like ADDIE. And say like, what does amazing analysis look like? What does amazing design look like? And there's a lot of answers there. AI is just a potential way of achieving that. And so I always recommend, when people ask me, what do you recommend about AI, to just really forget the AI, at least for now, and just go back to first principles, understand what great looks like, and then ask with a very critical mind if and how AI would impact our ability to achieve great.
Cool. Okay, on that note, a round of applause. And before you all go, we're going to give a rock star exit. Okay, so up you all get. After 3, you're going to get a rock star exit.
I'm going to go with that.
Yeah, cool. So everybody stretch, because you've been sat for a bit, so just make sure nothing's going to go muscle-wise. Okay, so after 3. We're going to be better than that, aren't we? Yeah, way more noise. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Okay. Have a wonderful evening.